There's been so much talk about the BRICS currency. The BRICS are going to have a new currency. It's going to be the end of the dollar again. More nonsense. The BRICS may have a currency in 10 or 15 years. We'll see. They're doing a lot of other things right, but launching a currency is not one of them. But they don't have to. They already have one. It's gold.
Yeah.
So the short answer to your question is gold is very much in demand. The central banks are buying it as fast as they can. I like the trade because with central bank buying, it kind of puts a floor under it. No guarantees, but it puts a floor under it. So I call it an asymmetric trade. You don't have much downside because the central banks are buyers, but you own all the upside. So that's a good position to be in. And one last thing, it's a very strong gold market. It's going to get stronger. I see gold at $4,000 an ounce before the end of this year and going up from there. But we are not at the retail frenzy stage, which I lived through in January 1980. I mean, I worked at Citibank at the time. They had a mandatory lunch hour. They did. And as I used to walk up Lexington Avenue, maybe shop at Bloomingdale's back in the day, if I can paraphrase the president, tariffs, baby, tariffs. They're going to do it with tariffs. And, the globalists and the elitists and the economists and the Financial Times and New York Times, all these, Larry Summers, all these globalists who have basically, empowered the communist Chinese and almost destroyed the U.S. economy. So you can't have tariffs. We need free trade. Free trade doesn't exist, has never existed. Even David Ricardo, who was the father of comparative advantage theory, said there's a lot of flaws in this. And they are. The main flaw is that the inputs, the factors of production are mobile. So you and I could say, you're Britain, I'm Portugal, you grow wool, I grow grapes. I ought to buy woolens from you and you ought to buy wine from me. Why are we trying to grow grapes in Britain? That's a comparative advantage. But it's also, it presupposes that those advantages are static. In the real world, they're not. So what was Taiwan's comparative advantage in semiconductors in 1978? Zero. They had comparative advantage tuna fishing and rice farming. That was tourism. That was about it. But they created a huge advantage in semiconductors out of thin air. The government just said, we're going to do it. And they put the resources behind it, created Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing. They had a very liberal policy. Like if you were a bright up-and-comer Taiwan semiconductor and you said, I want to start manufacturing, they said, go ahead. They would give you seed capital. They created a network. They brought in talent from California, et cetera. Now they are the leading, most advanced, fastest, best semiconductor producer in the world.
The classical idea of comparative advantage, first advanced by David Ricardo in 1817, argues that countries can specialize in goods they produce with relatively lower opportunity cost and trade for the rest. But critics observe that many of Ricardo's assumptions, immobile capital, two-country models, no-factor migration, no longer hold. Today's global economy features capital, people, and inputs moving across borders, which weakens the neat version of comparative advantage. In practice, nations actively craft new advantages rather than merely specialize in existing ones, and governmental policy plays a decisive role in shaping those trajectories.
My point is, they had the talent, they imported the capital, they had good government policy, and they created their own comparative advantage. So free trade is nonsense. It's what you do with policy, number one. Number two, this idea that tariffs stand in the way of free trade, well, that's a good thing. It's not new. The United States built itself on tariffs. We did not have an income tax until 1913. Well, how the heck did we finance the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, expansion in the West, creation of industry, the invention of the telephone, telegraph, electricity, airplanes, steam engine, coast-to-coast railroads, transcontinental railroads. How did we do all that with no income tax? Tariffs and excise taxes. That's how we did it. So, there's nothing new about it. There's a thread, and I'll talk about it. They'll be writing about this. From George Washington to Alexander Hamilton, John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln was a big proponent of tariffs. William McKinley, all the way through Dwight Eisenhower up until the Trade Enhancement Act of 1962. It was all about tariffs. So Trump is not doing something new or radical. He's going back to what used to be called the American system. And it's already working. One of the biggest blunders recently, Volkswagen put a multi-billion-dollar plant in Mexico to build the Audi Q5 SUV, which is one of their most popular items, in reliance on what's now the USMCA, was NAFTA, but basically no tariffs between Mexico and the United States. But guess what? Trump's putting on tariffs. Now he's saying you can build anything you want, sell anything you want to Americans free of tariffs, but do it here. Do it in the United States. So kind of in a roundabout way, the answer to your question, Nomi, is the investment is going to come from people jumping the tariff walls and putting their plants and investment and expansion in the United States. So that's number one. And you don't just get the investment, which is a part of GDP. You get high-paying jobs. And that's what America was always about. So
Historically, in the United States, tariffs and other trade measures were not anomalies but tools for growth. For example, the tariff of 1789 raised import duties and produced more than 80% of federal revenue in its time. Similarly, the later McKinley Tariff of 1890 sharply raised duties to protect domestic industry. These policies reflect the American system model of industrialization, active government support, infrastructure investments, protective trade measures rather than a passive embrace of free trade alone.
Trump's not radical. He's actually going back to our roots, and roots that were around for almost 200 years of tariffs and build it in America. Now, on natural resources, that's a great point and very, very powerful. $38 trillion in debt, yeah, but how about $200 trillion of resources that we haven't tapped into? This goes back to the 19th century. We can sell federal land. Now, you're going to sell the Grand Canyon? No, we're not going to sell the Grand Canyon. We're not going to sell Sequoia National Park. But the United States owns like somewhere between a third and a half of all the land west of the Mississippi. You can increase leasing for mining, gold, silver, uranium, lithium, rare earths, all the things we need. And then, obviously you charge rents or royalties for those leases, or, get royalty streams. There are a lot of ways to organize it economically. You can sell the land, or you can just, generate revenue from it. And Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has talked about this. He said, yeah, we got liabilities, but we're going to monetize the asset side of the balance sheet. So don't just look at the liabilities, look at the assets. What about the intellectual property that's bottled up in, the National Institutes of Health, the NASA, the military, et cetera, and government contractors where the U.S. owns the intellectual property? Well, subject to national security concerns, how about licensing some of that? So the ability to monetize assets, create growth, create investment, high-paying jobs is all there. All you have to do is abandon the globalist agenda, which only supported communism in China, and get back to America. And by the way, quick footnote, when I explain what I just explained to people, they go, oh, Jim, I hear you, it makes sense, but it's going to hurt Brazil, it's going to hurt China, it's going to hurt France. I said, too bad. That's their problem. It's up to, let Macron make France great again. Let President Xi make China great again. That's their job. Our job is to make America great again.
A modern illustration, Taiwan transformed from rice and tuna exports into the global leader in advanced semiconductors. Rather than relying on pre-existing natural advantage, Taiwan invested in talent, seed capital, liberalized startups, and global collaboration, creating new industrial strength. In other words, it did not wait for free trade winds to blow. It engineered its comparative advantage. This underscores how policy matters. Open-ended free trade alone is rarely sufficient. Strategic investment and institutional frameworks often define winners and losers in global competition.
It's not the end of trade. It's the end of stupid trade, meaning we don't charge any tariffs, but everybody else does. Why does that work for us? So let's have, Trump's talked about reciprocal tariffs. Some of the tariffs they look punitive superficially, like why is he throwing 40% on Vietnam? Everyone's like, yeah, Vietnam's a little poorer, struggling country. Well, maybe, but they're also a transshipment point for China. When we put tariffs on China, this goes back to 2018 in Trump's first term, China started shipping goods or semi-assembled goods to Vietnam, doing final assembly, shipping them to the United States under a very favorable tariff regime. It was a Chinese end run around the tariffs on China. And obviously everyone knows that. And Peter Navarro knows that. He's the trade and manufacturing czar in the White House. He's the reason that we have a two-tier tariff system on Vietnam is 20% on their own stuff, but 40% on Chinese transshipment. So that's smart policy. And by the way, it's not just about getting investment in the United States, although that's a big part of it. You also get revenue. You collect tens or hundreds of billions.
And that's how you grow.
Right. And sorry to interrupt, but by the way, I'll quote the New York Times, Washington Post crowd. They know nothing about economics, but they're saying, well, this one big beautiful bill is going to increase the deficits. It's not doing what they said it would do, et cetera. Those stories are based on Congressional Budget Office projections. The Congressional Budget Office has never been right, not even close. And go back and look at 20 years of Congressional Budget Office projections, 5 to 10 years forward. Show me one that was even close. It doesn't exist. So first of all, that's garbage. And it's not that they're dumb. They don't have computers. It's the case that their models are badly flawed because they assume static behavior. And what I mean by that is, you change the law, they assume everything else stays the same, and then compute how much tax revenue or deficit you're going to have based on the change in the law with no change in behavior. That's nonsense. Behavior changes immediately. And they don't even count tariffs. So they're projecting budget deficits without counting tariffs, and we're looking at hundreds of billions of dollars coming in from tariffs. So the CBO is garbage for the reasons I mentioned. The revenue projections are going to be much higher. The deficit is going to be much smaller. And you get on that path I talked about earlier.
While free trade has merits, it is not a universal panacea. Critics argue that assuming factors of production are static, a core assumption of classical models, fails to reflect reality. Moreover, studies suggest that rising tariffs can influence structural change in economies. One quantitative model found that a 20 percentage point increase in manufacturing tariffs in the U.S. could modestly increase domestic manufacturing share and welfare, albeit with caveats. Thus, trade policy should be seen as a strategic instrument, not simply a neutral backdrop.
I'll go back to my favorite word, narrative, which are get powerful but usually wrong. But the narrative today is, it's the end of the dollar's losing its role as reserve currency. I don't agree with that at all. I can explain why that's not happening. But then I say to people, one of my favorite jazz songs from the Montreux Jazz Festival in 1968 is Compared to What was the name of the song. When people say, is the dollar going up or down? I say, compared to what? If you're comparing it to the euro, right now it's going down. It's probably going to stay down. That's not a sign of weakness in the dollar. It's really important for investors to understand this is being engineered by the U.S. Treasury. This is part of Steve Moran's Mar-a-Lago Accord. You got to, go back a little bit, do your homework on what's actually going on in the White House. This is engineered. This is not that different from the petrodollar in 74 and the Plaza Accord in 85. So those are your precedent. Both of them devalued the dollar. So this is being engineered by the Treasury. So don't expect the dollar to go up. It does not mean the end of the world, the end of the role of the dollar as a reserve currency. My question is this: has it gone down against the euro? Yeah. So what? If you think the dollar's role as a store of value is in decline or about to collapse, what are you going to do? Say, hey, give me some euros, give me some yen. Do you really want German and Italian bonds and Japanese government bonds in a world where the dollar is collapsing? No, not at all. Because they're all, I call them, they're all survivors in the lifeboat. They're going to sink or swim together. It's not like one's going down, the others are not. They're all joined to the hip. So what is the alternative? If for whatever reason you want to diversify out of dollars, and I think that's always a good thing, you go to gold. And one quick footnote on that.
What does this mean for today and tomorrow? First, countries sitting on resources, natural, intellectual, or infrastructural, can unlock value through deliberate policy and institutional design. For instance, monetizing federal assets, leasing land, licensing intellectual property, and supporting nascent industry can create high-value jobs and revenue streams. Second, as the global economic order evolves, with questions over reserve currencies, supply chain realignments, and shifting geopolitical power, strategic trade policy becomes more salient. Whether through savvy investment, targeted protection, or industrial strategy, nations can choose to shape their futures, not simply adapt to them.
There's been so much talk about the BRICS currency. The BRICS are going to have a new currency. It's going to be the end of the dollar again. More nonsense. The BRICS may have a currency in 10 or 15 years. We'll see. They're doing a lot of other things right, but launching a currency is not one of them. But they don't have to. They already have one. It's gold.
Yeah.
So the short answer to your question is gold is very much in demand. The central banks are buying it as fast as they can. I like the trade because with central bank buying, it kind of puts a floor under it. No guarantees, but it puts a floor under it. So I call it an asymmetric trade. You don't have much downside because the central banks are buyers, but you own all the upside. So that's a good position to be in. And one last thing, it's a very strong gold market. It's going to get stronger. I see gold at $4,000 an ounce before the end of this year. and going up from there. But we are not at the retail frenzy stage, which I lived through in January 1980. I mean, I worked at Citibank at the time. They had a mandatory lunch hour. They did. And as I used to walk up Lexington Avenue, maybe shop at Bloomingdale's back in the day, and I never did it once without seeing gold chain snatching. It would be like some woman would scream, you turn around, there's a guy, grab the chain around. That's how crazy people were about gold. We're not there yet. I'm not in favor of chain snatchings, but we may get to that mentality. But here's why. And again, very simple math. So let's say gold goes up $1,000 an ounce. Well, if you own 100 ounces, you just made $100,000. But to go from $3,000 to $4,000 is a 33% gain. To go from $9,000 to $10,000 is only an 11% gain. It's the same $1,000. You made the same $100,000 on your 100 ounces, but it gets easier as you go along. So people, this again, you gotta like have a little behavioral psychology behind this. People are like, oh, I made $1,000, another $1,000, another $1,000. But yes, that's the nominal amount, the dollar amount. But the percentage just keeps dropping because the denominator, the base, is larger, and it gets easier. So all of a sudden, you go, oh my goodness, 10, 11, 12, and that's what happens. That's the frenzy stage. If you have gold, I recommend 10% of your investable assets. Don't bet your home equity or your business, but whatever else you have, those are your investable assets. I recommend a 10% allocation. If you're not there, keep buying. If you don't have any, you have not missed the boat. This thing is just getting started.